So, hello everyone. I, Yashwardhan Singh, Assistant Professor at St. Xavier's College, Jaipur, and Vice President of Rajasthan Economic Association, welcomes you to the first webinar on Indian economy, life and livelihood as part of the webinar series on COVID-19, jointly organized by Niti Aayog Chair, University of Rajasthan, and the Indian Econometric Society in collaboration with Rajasthan Economic Association. The topic for today's discussion is Indian economy, life and livelihood in COVID-19 period. And we have a panel of eminent speakers who will share their views and I will introduce them one by one before they speak. As you all know that COVID-19 has become a global catastrophe and has created a havoc in major parts of the world, be it developed, developing or underdeveloped economies. India is no exception in this situation, and low fiscal resources and huge diversification in the Indian economy has made it difficult for the policymakers to chart out a specific roadmap in this critical situation. Therefore, it becomes really important to talk about relevant sectors and the roadmap for the economy so that India returns to its growth trajectory as soon as possible. I am going to begin by inviting Professor Vijay Veer Singh, who is a professor of economics at the Department of Economics and Director Niti Aayog Chair, University of Rajasthan. And he is currently the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. He is an acknowledged expert on public policy and sectoral issues of Indian economy and has worked on various research projects in the area of agricultural economics, political economy, competition and regulation, investment environment in India, poverty, rural development, and higher education. I request him to begin the discussion by giving a background to the issue and highlight the topics of the webinar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Yash. First of all, I welcome all the experts. As Yash discussed, that is, we are certainly passing through a very uncertain moments of our life, and people are worried. If you look at the population, that is, if the workers wonder what will happen to their jobs, if you look at the business people, they are struggling to pay their operational costs, and they are most wondered that whether the clients will be buying their product or not once the lockdown opens. Banks and investors are tense whether they will be able to recover their monies, and governments are certainly busy in calculating what is going to be the magnitude of the shock. We are also discussing, that is, whether the recovery of Indian economy will be U-shaped, V-shaped, W-shaped, or L-shaped, whatever it is. But daunting questions remains: how can we save both life and livelihood? And how governments are going to evaluate the risk of starvation, job protection, income security, food supplies, and general welfare of the most vulnerable people of the country. This background, we decided to have a series of lectures and panel discussions. And the first theme we have given is, first area we have covered with the theme of life and livelihood, because we visualize that life and livelihood are not opposed to each other. The first area we are covering, that is rural income and migration. One serious issue which we see openly first time in India, that is the contrast between India and Bharat. India got COVID and they are hiding in their houses, while Bharat is on the streets and they are not able to understand what is happening to them. They are not feared or they are not scared of this disease, but certainly they are visualizing that we were working, what will happen to our future? That is the biggest question with these people. And in country like India, where almost 90% people work in informal sector, if this sector's economy suffers, this is going to be the worst suffering sectors. Government is certainly planning these relief measures through PDS or UBI. They're discussing various issues. But one question is very clear: that now should we talking of poverty line for these workers, or should we talking of dignity lines? Now, again, there are various questions relating to this migration law, supporting enterprises, employment and incomes, stimulating the economy and jobs, how we are going to do that, protecting workers in their workplace, should be looking for some labor reforms. So these are the certain issues continuing in our mind. When we come to the second sector, that is MSME sector, one thing is very clear that after the lockdown or the shutdown of the factories and shops, absence of worker from workplace, break of supply chain, one weakness is clearly open, and it highlights clearly that large proportion of Indian population cannot survive in a disruption of an economic activity. They cannot save themselves, and they have to look towards the government. People are discussing that deep down this vulnerability is the region that Indian economy is in a catch of small size, whether it is agriculture or you think of the entrepreneurs. When we look at the Indian entrepreneurs, around 70% entrepreneurs are own account entrepreneurs. They do not employ anyone. They run their business at their own and generate income barely sufficient to survive their families. But in a case of crisis, the family certainly is looking towards the government. Now, the around 9-10% people who are working in the formal sector. So that is very limited amount of people working in the formal sector, and that is certainly causing issues that how much people are going to be unemployed. Some people are debating that when we talk of MSME sector, that India has focused too much on first time, that is micro, which provide employment, certainly, but does not create sufficient income. In contrast, economists suggest that we have given little emphasis on medium scale industries, which provide employment, which provide the chain for the support system for micro and small enterprises. That is again an issue for discussion. Some economists are discussing that government should be thinking in terms of pseudo equity, that in place of extension of loans, debt restructuring, debt financing, government should be making direct investment in businesses, and that can be recovered in future. Last but not the least sector, there is the fiscal stimulus required. We are reading every day that developed world is providing a 5%, 7%, 8%, and we are saying India should be doing the same. But I don't think that we are in the capacity to do that much type of or 10% of GDP in fiscal stimulus, because if we borrow heavily, we have maybe leading to risk of losing confidence of investors or collapse of currency, or may lead to a situation of financial crisis. One thing is clear, that with this financial issues, people or the countries were not approaching IMF for financial bailout. And if you see the list of countries, almost 100 countries have approached IMF for financial bailout because they cannot arrange resources locally. Now we come to the core area related to Indian economy, basically. That is, again, discussion is that can we generate revenue by tinkering the taxes? Because when you look at the tax structure, indirect taxes give almost 65% revenue, and 35% is by direct taxes. But if you increase taxes, that can be more regressive, then people are debating that should be reducing the tax slabs, the tax percentage of GST. Another equally important for finances is managing public expenditure, that we need to manage public expenditure very efficiently. And this leads to a question, should be compromising, and how much we should be compromising with the fiscal deficit target of FRBM Act. And the last but not the least, the most important part is the state finances. In state finances, the issue is the majority of expenditure and implementation of schemes and various things is taking place at the state level. And state finances have far-reaching influence on welfare of economic opportunities in India. Now, 35% GST coming from state finances coming from GST, that is almost on hold during lockdown. And the state have only two options, that is generating revenue through sale of alcohol and fuel. So now with these initiating remarks, I would hear from other panelists that what is their reaction on these. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your insights and the scene setting for other panelists. Now we'll be moving on to Professor S. Chandrasekhar, who is a professor at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai, and he's an alumnus of Delhi School of Economics and Pennsylvania State University. He was awarded the Mahalanobis Memorial Medal 2016 by the Indian Econometric Society for his quantitative research, and has been working extensively on the issue of urbanization, income inequality, and internal migration in India. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Yash. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this webinar. मेरा कहना है कि आज हम जिस मुद्दों पे चर्चा कर रहे हैं, nothing is really new. And I want to spend the first couple of minutes convincing you that Hindi movies have done a great job of depicting reality. Just bear with me for 30 seconds. Take the Irfan Khan movie, Hindi medium. It talks about getting his daughter into English medium school. Go back to 1970s, Amitabh Bachchan, Namak Halal. It's about where he is a migrant. He says, I can talk English, I can walk English. So English was considered an important language for migration even in the 1970s, and they basically brought this issue up. Go back to the 1950s, you had this great movie, Do Bigha Zameen. It was about farmer, it was about debt, it was about loans. Come to the 70s, you have a great Farooq Sheikh movie, Gaman, which was about migration. तो मेरा ये कहना है कि यदि आप हिंदी मूवीज में रुचि रखते हैं, so they have done a great job of depicting reality. Now let's step back in terms of this whole issue of rural incomes beyond Hindi movies. Ambedkar 100 years ago wrote that the biggest problem facing India in 1920 was land fragmentation. And he said that unless you solve the problem of land fragmentation and small land holdings, rural India will continue to grapple with poverty. We are having the same conversation in 2020. In 1920s, Ambedkar said that India's only hope is to go for manufacturing. In 2020, we are talking about India getting into manufacturing. Today, we are talking about government providing expanded benefits under NREGA, which is a very valid demand. Now, the 100 days employment actually was thought of in the year 1961, if you go back and read the third 5-year plan. So I hope you're convinced that the whole issue of rural income, rural distress has been discussed at length pre-independence, post-independence, and has been beautifully characterized in the Hindi movies. Now let's cut to the chase in terms of the reality today. We are talking about migrants and migrant workers. And I think this crisis actually offers a great opportunity to start setting things right. And let me outline a 8-point or a 9-point agenda in terms of what needs to be done. So we are talking about coordination between the states. The Economic Survey 2 years ago said that had devoted a full chapter to internal migration and said that we need better coordination between the states. There is an example where the Orissa government and the Andhra Pradesh government actually signed a MOU. If only state governments recognize each other's migrants, we will have a lesser problem today. And this would be the first step before we actually talk about portability of benefits. The Supreme Court has actually talked about one nation, one ration card. At the moment, states do not allow portability of benefits within the same state. So can we take this opportunity to make portability of benefits intrastate, and then once this coordination mechanism is set up between the states, we actually talk about one nation, one ration card, one nation, one labor market. And maybe the Finance Commission of India needs to take this up as a terms of reference in terms of how you are basically going to address the fiscal cost of migration. So the 2 points that I made: one, coordination between states; two, how do you bring in portability? Does Finance Commission have a role? The third issue is, whenever new state government is formed, whenever new government takes over, they have started talking about reservation of jobs. They use the sons of soil argument, which is a very dangerous thing. Some state governments in the past have said, I will have a language requirement for you to be eligible for a certain job in the state. Maharashtra did try this thing, saying that you need to know Marathi to be an auto driver, which was later struck down by the courts. Karnataka has tried to argue that you actually need to know Kannada to get a job in a shop floor. Now, when you do job reservations or you put in some language requirements, it actually increases the internal barriers to migration. And on the issue of language, a lot of migrants move with the children. I'm not only talking about seasonal migrants, but people who move with their families. The whole issue of language has got politicized today. Many states are saying that the official language of the state has to be a compulsory subject. Some states have said, in the government schools, the official language of the state will be the medium of instruction. Now imagine you're from Odisha and you move to Maharashtra, and your child is actually required to learn Marathi. This doesn't matter whether you're a poor migrant or a rich migrant. Unless and until our education system basically allows people to move, especially the right to education ensures that children don't fall between the cracks because of migration by their parents, our school system also has to be receptive in terms of in what languages children will actually learn. On the issue of language, at the moment, if you're a migrant worker, all the documents that you are supposed to get is not available in all the languages. Let's assume that you are Bengali and you move to Tamil Nadu. If all the documentation is in Tamil, it's not of much use to you. So the point is, how do you basically ensure that language is not a barrier for migrants? You need to basically make available the documents for all labor registration procedures being available in multiple languages. That is how you ensure that workers know what they are doing, workers know what are the benefits available to them. I would urge you to go to the BOCW website of the Maharashtra government, and they have this very nice table which tells you how many migrants are working in the construction sector from different states of India. And I'm very sure most of them or many of them don't speak Marathi and are not conversant with Marathi. So we really need to look at language as a deterrent. We have talked about the Building and Construction Welfare Board. It's been written at length saying that, you know, we have 52,000 crore rupees, which is actually unspent. The Supreme Court has passed many judgments saying why are state governments actually not spending. The BOCW is a great example of having a safety net in place, but not implementing it. We have to start paying attention to this particular thing. So this is from a macro picture. And I presume many of you who are basically listening to this webinar are also researchers. And I would actually like to now lay out a research agenda for you on the whole issue of migration. First is, many of you are probably logged in from Rajasthan or from other states. What is the role of the panchayat? I think the panchayats have done an exceptional job of stepping up and addressing the issue of return migration. They have used 14 Finance Commission funds. They've figured out how to find the money. They have run community kitchens. They have run quarantine facilities. I think this opportunity we should not lose to recognize the panchayats and actually strengthen them. So if you want a research agenda, I think it would be useful for you to look at how the panchayats in the state where you are actually working have actually responded. What are the success stories? What are the difficulties faced by them? And I don't think we should lose this opportunity. The Anganwadi worker collects a lot of data, including number of in-migrants and the out-migrants. We have a lot of administrative data that's actually collected by the panchayats. I think we have to verify that data and make sure that good data is actually collected, not for snooping around, but for policy purposes. Then comes this whole issue of accommodation. When you think about accommodation, it means different things for different people. If you're well off, it's for rental housing. If you're a migrant worker, it's about how you will provide accommodation in the dorms, in the working men's hostel, working women's hostels. If you're a student, you're talking about how you will provide accommodation for the students. It would be useful for each one of us to actually figure out what are the housing policies of the different state governments, and are they even migrant friendly? I am often asked the question, does India actually need a migration policy? It's a difficult question because it can't be answered with a yes or a no. Indian constitution permits people to actually move. So what you need is policies and programs which are actually migrant sensitive. In the last few days, some state governments have actually said that I'm going to dispense with the labor laws. There was a whole discussion on the Social Security Code Bill 2019, and I think we need to have a larger debate on the Social Security Code Bill. The most well-meaning of labor laws have not been implemented. This does not mean that we need to start scrapping labor laws, but I would actually call for a larger debate on Social Security Code 2019. So if you actually think about it, there is a research agenda. How have panchayats responded? We can do a very detailed study of migration histories. We can do a detailed study in terms of migrants' contracts that they get into with the labor broker who takes them to the city. There's a whole research agenda that's available there, which cannot be addressed with the National Sample Survey data or any of the other standard data sets. And here I think we researchers have a very active role in terms of conducting very detailed studies in order to inform the debate in terms of how you're going to take care of the migrant workers better, and also recognize the contribution of the migrant workers to the Indian economy. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, sir, for your insights. We'll be now moving on to Dr. Manoranjan Sharma, who is the Chief Economist, Informatics Ratings, New Delhi. And previously he was with Canara Bank as the Chief Economist, General Manager, and Chief Learning Officer at the Canara Bank. He has to his credit more than 250 publications and 6 books, and has been working extensively on the banking issues and MSME sector. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Yash. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you can. You can.
Okay, thank you very much. I think all of us agreed that this is a crisis of a momentous proportions, completely humongous, and the scale, the magnitude of the crisis has often been compared with the global financial crisis of October 2008 and even the Great Depression of 1929. But it is generally now agreed, even the IMF came out with a report which is available in the public domain this month that says that this crisis, in terms of its magnitude, in terms of its severity, could be even more devastating than the global financial crisis of 2008 or even the Great Depression of 1929. It is widely agreed that MSMEs in India have been very hugely hit. They have been completely devastating or a crippling hit. So in about 12-15 minutes, which I have here, what I'll try to do is I'll try to paint some kind of a big picture. I will also briefly, within the constraints of the time, also do some kind of a Is this okay?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, also try to highlight some aspects which come from a more disaggregated, granular examination of the vast gamut of issues in the MSME space. Now, to manage economic stress in India, where do we go from here? there are three basic course of action which has been suggested, which I would like to put before you, is that guaranteeing the functioning of essential sectors, providing enough resources for people hit by the crisis, and preventing excessive economic disruption. Going forward, these three have to be the basic mool mantras. Now, MSME Minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, yesterday pointed out that the position of MSMEs was the worst, as they were now engaged in a battle for their survival. The minister has explained that they are trying to come up with a scheme envisaging setting up of a rolling fund where the interest cost on the payments due to the MSMEs shall be borne either by the supplier or the purchasing power. Mr. Gadkari also said that the government will set a rupees 1 lakh crore fund to repay outstanding payments to MSMEs owed by the central and state government undertakings and major industries. Coming to MSMEs in the post-COVID-19 world, it is widely agreed that maybe this crisis has its origin in China. And like in English, we have the alphabets, Hindis, we have the letters. The Chinese character for alphabets is called characters. And the Chinese characters for crisis make very interesting reading. They represent both danger and opportunity. This is particularly applicable to the MSME sector in India, which if you take any parameter, 30% of the GDP, 45% in total manufacturing output, 45% of exports, largest contributor to employment, about 12 crore, next only to Indian agriculture. So all these are stylized facts. They are already known to all well-informed persons, but it is not so widely realized that MSMEs are quite vulnerable. They are susceptible to this kind of a crippling winds of change, and they have minimal reserves to meet difficulties. They are faced with a double whammy of disruption of the entire supply chain for procuring goods for resale, both from imports and domestic purchases, and significant erosion of customer base. The lockdown has left them with unmet expenses, utility bills, rents, salaries, payments owed to these units are stuck, thus creating some kind of a double squeeze. Now, the entire MSME sector has received a very devastating hit. But if you do some kind of a disaggregated examination, you will find that even within the MSME sector is not a homogeneous sector. There are significant differences in terms of value addition, in terms of employment, in terms of the nature and sophistication of the products. But even within the sector, MSME, larger, broader space, sectors like tourism and hospitality sector, auto sector, aviation and tourism, shipping and non-food retail, real estate sector, building and construction. These are the sectors which have been completely crippled by the onslaughts of this crisis. Now, given the rapid unfolding of this crisis, we are faced with a situation which is quite depressing. I am reminded of a famous Urdu couplet, which goes something like this: जब कश्ती साबित और सालिम थी, साहिल की तमन्ना किसको थी, अब ऐसी शिकस्ता कश्ती पर साहिल की तमन्ना कौन करे. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Urdu language, let me give a brief English rendering that when the boat was all right, we did not want to reach the shore. Now that we have a ramshackle boat, how do we reach the shore? So this is broadly the situation with the MSMEs in India are today confronted with. And this becomes all the more important because the MSME contribution 40-45% to manufacturing, 30% to GDP. But where the government of India in the last few years have launched a ambitious MSME program, Make in India, so many other things. And it is envisaged that maybe we are aiming at about 50% to come from MSME sector. So how do we reach there? Some suggestions have been given that given the scale of the crisis, all the stakeholders, whether it is the government of India, central government, the state government, the lower level governments, industry associations, MSME entrepreneurs, industry bodies, all have to come together. But the initial push, the kickstart, if I may say so, has to be given by the government and to kickstart the entire process of rehabilitation of MSMEs in India on sound and robust, scalable lines, perhaps measures such as 50% sabbatical on GST for the next 6 months across the board to provide a stimulus to the demand side of the economy could be considered. Income tax refunds to MSMEs are coming much more swifter and faster. But we have some kind of an innovative suggestion, which I made at some other forums also, that in cases where clear refunds are available and the income tax department, due to the prevailing fiscal situation, is unable to grant big ticket refunds, the department may instead issue a refund certificate to the taxpayer. Based on this certificate, the banks which are flush with funds may sanction the amount to the SSE immediately, as this will have a sovereign guarantee. It will immediately enhance liquidity in the prevailing economic scenario, like some kind of a booster shot. IT department can later pay the refund directly to the banks concerned. All pending dues to the MSMEs in respect of PSU payments need to be cleared on a war footing. Other dues are also from the state governments, fertilizer corporation, other discoms. Over 53 companies, large companies in India, pay their suppliers. But then the issue of delayed payments to MSME has been an issue of long-standing concern. I think even the parliament passed a Delayed Payments Act the act was passed by the parliament about 20 years back. But then, despite the enactment of such stringent all India acts, the situation on the ground leaves much to be desired, and still we come across cases, and these kind of instances get aggravated, get accentuated in these kind of periods of crisis. So maybe the larger companies have to be sympathetic, have to ensure that the payments of MSME suppliers are cleared quickly. Reconstruction of term loans with government guarantee, 6 months loan moratorium, easing of NPA recognition norms and special mention accounts, SMA 1 and 2, providing of subsidized warehouse or inventory management facilities, enhanced access to credit, and deferment of utility and social security payments would also go some measure towards reducing the pain and miseries faced by MSME units across the country. I would also like to briefly highlight that it's not all gloom and doom. In this environment, disconcerting environment, absolutely alarming environment, we see pockets of opportunity. For example, let me refer briefly to one stark example. In the last 20 years or so, last 30 years, China has emerged as some kind of a global factory. But this provides a real opportunity to us to leverage our strengths, to leverage maybe several companies at the global level, several of the big daddies, they have already taken a decision to move out of China. There are some other countries, some other companies which are seriously considering. So if the government could ensure that there's no disruption in the global chain with an industrial network, abundant natural resources, and relatively cheap workforce, India could attract manufacturers as an alternative base, particularly in specialty chemicals, fertilizers, and pesticides, where China had a 20% share in the world market last year. MSMEs also have to do some step. Ultimately, the best help is self-help. So MSMEs also need to be sensitized on initiating discussion for extension in contract tenure, extension in cover period for working capital assessment, review of their hedging strategy, move slow on any capex plan, leave inventory, convert fund-based outstanding working capital demand loan, stress testing, conservation of human resources, and they may also review their profit and loss account for cost optimization measures. The government, as I said earlier, has to play a catalytic role in getting the MSMEs back on track. In this connection, the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India has taken several important measures. On 26th March, The Honorable Finance Minister came with an economic stimulus package, followed by unscheduled monetary policy on March 27. This was followed by another monetary policy announcement by the RBI governor on April 17, 2020. Now, all these measures are welcome, and banks have become slightly more proactive, more alive to the situation. But all these measures are certainly very welcome, and they will go some step in alleviating the pain and miseries of the MSME units. But then some fundamental questions have been raised in this space, that whether the measures taken by the Government of India or the Reserve Bank of India, are they enough in terms of timeliness of credit, in terms of adequacy of credit to MSMEs, in terms of cost of credit to the MSMEs. So these are fundamental and difficult questions. It is difficult to give a direct answer, but I am sure that we are moving in the right direction, and gradually things will improve. Now, already some measure at the Government of India level, a disaster management framework focused on creating a robust channel to provide information and create awareness. Some steps have been taken toward this, and the Government of India should ensure compulsory disaster response training program in public and private organizations. The Government of India is also considering creating a policy to empower domestic trade industry to maintain continuity in the supply chain. Now, we are today faced with a crisis of monumental proportions. Hence, while keeping faith in the innate dynamism and potential of the Indian people, we must look at all innovative out-of-box options to extricate ourselves from this vicious circle and to trigger a virtuous circle of regenerative growth and transformation. The road ahead is certainly difficult. The tunnel is long and difficult, but I'm confident MSMEs in India have displayed dynamism and resilience repeatedly over the course of the last several years. And with the kind of measures that are likely to be taken by various stakeholders, I am confident that we shall overcome. This too shall pass. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your insights on the MSMEs and the problems they are facing as of now and the government's strategies. Now we'll be moving on to our fourth panelist, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, who is a professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi, and is the secretary of the Indian Econometric Society. Previously, he was with the Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi, as the assistant and associate professor, and has been also associated with UNESCAP, Bangkok, UNDP Regional Center for Asia Pacific Region, Colombo, World Bank, ILO, and Asian Development Bank, just to mention a few. He has been working extensively on the development economics, macro monetary economics, international money and finance, and macroeconomic modeling. Now moving on to you, sir.
Thank you, Yash. First of all, let me thank Rajasthan Economic Association as well as Niti Aayog Chair of Rajasthan University for initiating this webinar series in collaboration with the Indian Econometric Society. And I also like to thank other panelists, and let me share some of my thoughts on what the fiscal policy actions that one can have, and what are the limitations that in terms of coming out with some of the stimulus measures. And as Professor V.V. Singh already pointed out in the beginning, Indian economy actually was in a deceleration phase even before the COVID-19 has hit us. And in fact, that is also the same when you look at the fiscal situation. The fiscal situation again was in a very poor conditions even before the COVID-19 came in. And we have already seen when the Government of India presented the budget in February 2020, they actually invoked the escape clause of the FRBM Act, where they can run 0.5% more fiscal deficit for not for 1 year, but for 2 years, for the previous year as well as the current financial year. So clearly the fiscal situation was very bad at the central government level, and at the state governments, which we always believe that the state governments are actually the first line of defense in dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. We have already seen there are many studies that showed that state government finances are also in a much weak position. So in this context, what are the policy measures, what are this policy space that we have is something that is very important. If you look at the macroeconomic policies, very clearly that monetary policy has actually came out with many measures. As Mr. Manoranjan Sharma pointed out, the RBI has actually came out with many measures, including cutting the reverse repo rate, as well as CRR, for providing more resources for the financial markets, and also for the state governments in terms of increasing the ways and means advances by 60%, and for MSME as well as NBFC sector. So we have seen some action on the monetary policy side, but on the fiscal policy, we have seen a very limited, initiatives. We had one round of stimulus measures where the finance ministry has came out with 1.7 lakh crore stimulus for, especially for the rural segments. Although many people would argue it is not an additional stimulus, it was only the large part of the stimulus was front loading some of the expenditure that we already planned for the current year. And there are many voices that say that the government has actually need to go for a large fiscal stimulus, and also need to monetize some part of the fiscal deficit. So I think in this context, we need to understand what the government of India as well as the state governments can do to really revive the economy. I think before that, we need to understand what would be the impact of of COVID-19 would have on the GDP growth of this country. There are many estimates that have come up right now. Some of them say positive growth, like IMF has came out with a forecast of 1.9%, while there are many have said it could be 0%, and maybe it could be minus 2% to 3%. That is the growth projection that we have right now. But in my view, my own assessment is that most probably we are going to have a negative growth in the current financial year, in case if we don't have any major fiscal stimulus that is going to come up in the next couple of weeks. Although the government of India said they are going to come out with a major stimulus, but in the absence of anything right now, it is not very difficult to predict that the Indian economy is going to experience a negative growth. In terms of the fiscal stimulus, I think many things that we raised by Professor Chandrasekhar and others. One of the things that we face right now is the the fiscal deficit. Even without any stimulus measures, even the government of India stick to whatever the expenditure proposal that have made in the budget. There are studies that shows, there are estimates that is showing that the fiscal deficit without any additional stimulus, you will have it can go to 5 to 5.5% of GDP in the current year. Yesterday, the government of India came out with the borrowing program, where very clearly mentioned that the government of India is going to increase their borrowing by almost 5 lakh crore compared to what they budgeted in the financial year. So to sum up, this year, I think we are going to have substantial reduction in the revenues that the government of India is going to mobilize, especially when the Indian economy is going to slow down. And at the same time, the expenditures, there are a lot of committed expenditures that the government of India has. I think to retain the committed expenditure and at the same time, seeing a substantial decline in the revenues will actually going to put a huge pressure on fiscal deficits. Now, at the state level, again, if you look at some of the states are very aggressively going for fiscal stimulus packages. And at the same time, as I said, their finances are also in a very weak position. And now we have already seen how the borrowing program of the states also has been going to be very difficult. One of the states which went to the market for borrowing actually had to borrow at the interest rate of 9%, when the repo rate is about 4.5% right now, and many other central government yields are actually at 6.5%. So that shows how already the state finances are in a very weak position. Now, if they want to borrow in the market, I think they may end up in running a huge public debt over a period of time. My own suggestions is that I think there is an urgent need for reprioritizing some of the expenditure that the government of India as well as the state governments actually proposed in the budget, and also one needs to recalibrate. In fact, for example, if you look at the state governments, many of the state governments are actually running revenue surpluses. I think what it means is that a lot of budget proposals that they have is actually meant for capital expenditure. So one of the ways where the state governments can recalibrate this particular expenditure is to really postpone some of the capital expenditures and allocate resources for increasing the demand in the country, in the particularly states. And if you look at again, there are a lot of states actually. In fact, when we looked at something like 24 states, we found that the fiscal deficit at the states, especially out of 24 states, 18 states are actually running a fiscal deficit of less than 3%, which was suggested by the FRBM Act. That means the state governments actually still have space for borrowing program, and they might have to go in increasing their borrowing or increasing the fiscal deficit if they want to finance some of the urgent needs at the state level. In terms of monetizing fiscal deficits, there are many voices that have said, I think one needs to be more cautious when you want to think of monetizing the deficit. We have come a long way to dismantle the monetization of the fiscal deficits. And I think that was one of the major reforms that we had seen in the early 1990s that worked out well in terms of managing the fiscal monetary relationships. But given that we are in a very unprecedented situation, I think many of the voices say that there's nothing wrong in going for a partial monetization of the fiscal deficit. I do believe that there is still scope for monetization of fiscal deficit, but at the same time there is a need for providing a very clear medium-term fiscal roadmap. Otherwise, as we all know, there are a lot of rating agencies are looking forward to really downgrade the Indian economic investment grade, which will have much more substantial negative impact in the medium term to long term. So I think here, while the government may be allowed to go for monetization of deficit partially, at the same time, I think the Finance Commission, which is supposed to submit their report by the end of October 2020, it needs to provide a very clear-cut FRBM roadmap, such a way that the rating agencies or the foreign investors are clear about what would be the fiscal position of this country going forward. So, so to sum up, I think partial monetization is welcoming, and at the same time there is a need for clear-cut FRBM roadmap. And I've been taking a position that the current FRBM roadmap that the government of India is following is actually a flawed one, and it actually doesn't really lead to expansion. Rather, it would lead to increasing inflation over a period of time. So, so the urgent need is to revert back to FRBM, original FRBM Act, and at the same time go for partial monetization of deficit. In terms of other support measures, as I said already, we have seen the government of India has came out with 1.7 lakh crore support for the rural segments. In fact, and as Mr. Manoranjan Sharma pointed out, there is definitely a need for providing stimulus to the MSME sector. But here there is a small catch, which is there even for the migration issues, as Mr. Chandrasekhar pointed out. In the MSME sector, unfortunately, right now, we just don't have a robust database. What is the extent of the fiscal or financial pressure these MSME sectors are actually facing? Now, I understand the survey was done some time back. Now, we also know that the MSME sectors, mortality rate are very high, and in the absence of any proper database, I doubt how the stimulus measures can be provided. That could be one of the hesitancy from the central government when, although they are very keen to provide resources or support for the MSME sector, but in the absence of very clear database or information, maybe it may be a difficult task. And we do have a much better database for the rural segment, and that's one of the reasons why the central government very quickly went for a stimulus program for the rural segments. In terms of central government support to the states, again, there are many voices that say that the center need to borrow from the market or the RBI and needs to support the state governments. Now here, I think that may be the way one should go. Now, if you look at, there are other transfers, like for example, GST transfers or the GST compensation. Even for the year last year, that is 1920, there are huge arrears that the government of India needs to do for the state governments. So I think the central government need to clear those GST revenues transfers to the states. For the current year, my own feeling is that the central government needs to front load the GST share of the states, and also I think they need to front load the GST compensation where they have to ensure 14% increase in the GST revenues for the states. So I think this is the only way to go. The center needs to borrow from the RBI or the banks or from the market so that they can clear the dues to the state governments and also can do some kind of front loading. That is the only way. Now, one last point on the third tier. I think again, I think Professor Chandrasekhar pointed out, third tier is one big black box in my view. Now, as part of the 14th Finance Commission, there are a lot of resources that have been transferred to the Panchayat Raj institutions. And my own feeling is that most of the Panchayat Raj institutions must be sitting with huge unspent balances. I think this is one area where the state governments can really look at and see how we can reduce the unspent balances at the Panchayat Raj institutions. By the way, there are many more unspent balances in many of the social sector programs. I think that is the first area where the state governments have to look at for additional resources. And the second would be to look at resources from the central government and at least get their own share of the GST and other compensations. And third, I think the state governments can go for borrowing from the market to the extent of 3%, which is provided under the FRBM law. I mean, if you can do all these things, I'm sure the governments can go for fiscal stimulus. At the end, as one of the central bankers said, these are all kind of a joint family system: central government, state governments, PRIs, RBI, and the public sector banks. Now, in any joint family system, if there is any crisis, I think it is the head of the joint family which needs to observe all those shocks. So in my view, it is the central government that needs to observe all those shocks, especially when you want to fight this crisis. So I will stop here and look forward for questions from you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your insights. Now we shall move on to the question and answer section. And I first of all thank all the panelists for their thought-provoking and informative presentations. Although we have limited time, but we are going to take up some questions which we are receiving from the participants. I think I'll just all the panelists are able to hear me. Yeah. So we can start with Singh sir. There is a question that what's your take on India's policy response to the COVID-19? Were we on time, or was it a delayed response, or it was an early response?
I think it was a very timely response, and we proved it that we were not prepared that much regarding the requirement of the health sector. And through lockdowns and all, now we are prepared. If even large number of patients come, that those can be treated. So it was a timely response.
Okay. Any other panelists would like to have any take on that, or we move to the next question?
I have one small,
Yes, sir.
This particular episode, as I said, we were looking forward for a very, very active fiscal response. Now, as I said, there are only two policies that we have: fiscal and monetary. Now, we would have expected that the fiscal policy would be very active and front-loading this policies. And we expect that the monetary policy to play a second role, rather a passive role or a supporting role. Now, what we see right now is a reverse of that. We have seen the very, very active monetary policy, where we have already seen RBI coming out with many measures in quick succession. Now, on the other hand, we have been seeing the more fiscal policy very, very hesitant. So I think in my view, it should be other way around. It should be very, very active fiscal policy with a supporting monetary policy over a period of time.
Okay, sir. There is one more question. Due to the poor lending by the banks and how the credit flow will be ensured by the government, how this credit crunch is going to affect the MSMEs, or will they be protected? Manoranjan sir, you will be able to take it up?
Yes, sir. The government of India has released a special dispensation package in terms, as I think Professor Bhanumurthy also mentioned, that we had two sets of monetary policies. Several relaxations has been given in terms of deferment of the EMI installments, a special package, some special package. I am also told by some of my friends that a special package focused on the needs and requirements of the MSE sector may also be rolled out by the government in a few days, which is expected to be ambitious. Apart from that, already measures have been taken that and credit needs of the MSMEs are being looked at more favorably. But then there's some kind of a trade-off involved here. The trade-off is that banks would like to push MSME lending, but at the end of the day, the banks are a commercial entity. So they have also look at their bottom line. So in specific sectors or segments which have a very high concentration of NPAs, maybe banks would not be very forthcoming. And the most stark example that you see is that, for example, the Reserve Bank of India has drastically slashed the reverse repo rate. And if banks have excess funds, they park it with the Reserve Bank of India, they get a return of 3.7%. By reducing this rate, in conjunction with the drastic reduction in CRR by 100 basis points, 1%, it was thought that banks would be incentivized. But the latest figures which I see, they are quite mind-boggling, that banks continue to park maybe about 9 lakh crore with the Reserve Bank in this kind of a reverse repo window, which simply means that given the kind of risk they foresee in the MSME sector, in some other sectors, maybe, and if I may speak of frankly, there is some kind of, banking is all about risk taking. Whether you look at the Banking Regulation Act 1949, or you look at the actual functioning of the banks, whether in India or all over the world, banks accept deposits for the purpose of lending. So lending has to be the bread and butter of the banking operations. Treasury could be something like bread and butter of the banking operations on the asset side, and treasury could provide something like icing on the cake. But in banks, there are various reasons because of which bankers are becoming risk averse to a certain extent. There are some, I was part of the banking sector, but now perhaps I can speak a little more freely, that there are some very varied words used in the banking sectors, words like accountability, fixing of responsibility, due diligence, and all that has led to, together with the fear of 4 C's, CBI, CIC, CVC, and the courts. So all that has led to some kind of a risk aversion on the part of banks. Bankers have to realize that they are in the basis of basic business of risk taking. So gradually at all forums, and attempt is being made constantly to sensitize the bankers, and I do hope that things will improve. It could take some time, some more time.
Okay, sir, thank you. There is one more question. There is a reverse migration going on as the migrants are going back to their states. And since 60%, almost 60% of the migrants are dependent on the construction and agriculture, which is almost closed as of now. How do you think that their livelihood would be protected as of now? I think Chandrasekhar sir would like to take it up.
I think it's an excellent research question, and we need to build an evidence base for this. There's no obvious answer to it. So people are going to migrate because there are no jobs in rural India. So how do we basically reduce the costs of migration, both the monetary and non-monetary costs? You have to build the evidence base.
Okay, sir. Also, there is a question that it's quite obvious that there is a dire need of the fiscal stimulus, but the problem is what should be the size? So how do you think that India has got enough in terms of the fiscal stimulus which they are planning, or it should be a bigger fiscal stimulus, or what should be the size of that? Bhanumurthy sir would like to take it up?
Yeah. Yes, that's a very good question. I mean, again, there is no straight answer for this. First of all, I think we need to understand what are the areas you need to provide stimulus. I mean, there's another question that said, many of the developed countries are giving 10% stimulus, but India is just provided only 0.8% stimulus. I think the comparison with the advanced countries, I don't think is a good comparison at this stage for the reasons which I already provided. We have a very big issue in the fiscal even before the COVID-19 hit us. Now, in terms of the stimulus, I mean, there are many people who argue that I think up to 5% of GDP needs to be provided if you want to really come out of this crisis. But I think I would say it is a work in progress. We don't even know, as I said, we don't even know what are the sectors and what are the areas one can go for stimulus and what kind of stimulus one can propose. As again, Mr. Sharma pointed out, can we take over some of the credit or some of the debts that banks as well as NBFCs are facing? So all these things, I think we need to really think about it over a period of time. I don't think it will happen in this financial year. See, as I said, the crisis is both on the demand and supply side. So what is important for the fiscal policy is that how can you revive the demand in the medium term to short term? I think that should be the focus. And now for that, whether we can go for 5% of GDP or 3% of GDP, and what are its implications and other macroeconomic parameters, these are all research questions. Now, some preliminary analysis we have already done. Now, if we increase the fiscal deficit more than what been budgeted in 2020-21 budget, I think there are some kind of side effects. Whether it can have impact on inflation, it can have impact on the current account deficit. So I think we need to see how far we can tolerate, like in terms of inflation. Can we tolerate 8% inflation, or can we tolerate 2.5 to 3% current account deficit? I think the limit on the fiscal deficit would be related to its impact on inflation as well as current account deficit. So I think that needs to be calibrated. I don't think we should fix the number on fiscal deficit or the fiscal stimulus right now, but it should be, we should plan it in a very, very calibrated manner.
Okay, sir.
Yeah,
Yash, with your permission, I'd like to supplement to this question.
Yes, sir, please go on.
This is an issue, how much fiscal deficit, as Professor Bhanumati, this is a very controversial issue. Estimates range from 5 to 10% of the fiscal deficit. Now, even if you agree on let us say a benchmark, a rough rule of thumb figure of 5%, I think the next logical corollary would be a very more difficult question to answer is, given the state of the Indian economy, how do we fund? How do we raise resources for this? So this is just in the nature of loud thinking, and my simple point is that all options need to be on the table, and we may not have the right answers, but we must consider all options so that we can arrive at the right answers. One option which could be considered is greater global borrowing, with the LIBOR rates being at 0.8 to 1%. Even if you load for a not very good rating of India, the landed cost may not be very high. So this is an option also we can look at. I'm not saying that whether we should go in for this option, but this can be considered. Then cost cutting, and with more targeted intervention. Then we, as I think Professor Bhanumati also stressed, exceeding encasing report is a landmark report. It gave an exit clause of 0.5%, which is clearly inadequate in the circumstances. So maybe, as Rangaraj and others have suggested, monetizing the fiscal deficit to an extent, together with laying a clear roadmap for the medium term. Then some other suggestions could also be like, in the last 1 year, there have been a significant change in the tax treatment of the saving instruments in terms of Section 80C of the Income Tax Act 1961. Traditionally, the investors would be getting some tax rebate, and this would have pushed up the revenues. Now, this year, the FM has 2 sets of measures, so it's left. Maybe it's a time to come back to this, give some incentivize, like the earlier systems, where, and in terms of the Section 80C of the Income Tax Act, the investors could be given some leeway, some flexibility. Now, this again, all these policy issues, we have to constantly grapple with trade-offs, their cost and benefits. So here, the flip side would be that our tax revenues will take a hit. But maybe given the kind of the scenario that we have, raising resources, so maybe this could also be considered as a fiscal measures. There could be so many other measures also, but for the sake of time constraints, I think I will stop here. Thank you.
I think Chandrasekhar sir was also wanted to add on
Yeah.
to that, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. You know, a lot of us are talking about what the government should be spending on. And there are actually three aspects to it. One is a safety net for people. That's like PDS, NREGA, etc. We know how to construct a safety net for rural India. And as Professor Bhanumurthy said, we know very little about urban India because we don't have good data. So one aspect of the spending program is safety net. The second aspect is how do you revive sectors and enterprises? And that's also rural urban story. We don't have a MSME database, etc. Then comes in terms of what is the stimulus package and how do you basically revive growth. So if you have to do a costing, it has to be along these three lines. And I think given that all the speakers have spoken harmoniously, so I think I want to disagree with what Dr. Manoranjan Sharma said. For me, it's a red flag to borrow from abroad. Let's not do sovereign borrowings. Please don't go away with this message that it's easy money. And I don't want to get into a squabble or a debate on this. Lots of countries, lots of evidence, don't borrow abroad.
Okay, sir. I think there are a lot of questions, sir, but due to the paucity of time, I don't think we'll be able to take it up. There is one interesting statement which has come up. I think you can reply to that in your sum up conclusion. Bhanu sir, you would like to say something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to add to what Professor Sharma and Professor Chandrasekhar said, another area where we need to be a little more careful in terms of determining the size of fiscal stimulus is on the extent of domestic savings. Now, if you look at today's article by Dr. Rangarajan in the Hindu, very clearly he says, now, if you want to go for a stimulus of 6% of GDP, I mean, at the central level, he thinks that, without any stimulus, the fiscal deficit of the central government would be 4.5%. Now, if you want to go for an additional stimulus of 1.5%, I think there is going to be a shortage of nearly 4 percentage points because there's also a decline in the savings. Over a period of time, unfortunately, the kind of monetary policy as well as the fiscal measures that have been taken over a period of time, I think there is a sustained decline in the savings. Now, in whole macroeconomics in this country, one variable which has been neglected both on the policy side as well as on the research is the domestic savings. Now, I think India, at least in the post-reform period, India has been a savings-led economy. I think that needs to be appreciated. And now what we are seeing is that because of the deterioration in the savings, we're actually seeing our potential growth of the country is also coming down. Now, I think that's where we need to look at what are the limits on the fiscal stimulus. Now, I agree with Professor Chandrasekhar. In fact, I have written on this. Now, borrowing from abroad for financing the fiscal deficit is not a good idea at this juncture. So maybe even the government has put that whole proposal. They stopped that proposal. They proposed in the last budget, and I think we don't really talk about it. And I don't think this is the right time to really go for borrowing from the foreign countries.
Yeah. Okay, sir. So, sir, you would like to say something?
Yeah, I just want to make one point.
Yeah.
One is basically fiscal stimulus and granting money to various agencies, schemes. And second part is the implementation. So here the most important part is because implementing agency is the state governments, the local bodies. So the data verification becomes very important. It should not be universal. The case is the first, the data is to be collected properly through state governments, that who are the people who are going to give benefit out of these financial stimulus, not everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, sir. So we'll move on to the final remarks from all the panelists. So the interesting statement which I was about to say was that the economy was in ICU before Corona, and after Corona it has moved on to the ventilator. So I think with that statement, I would request all the panelists to just conclude your speech in 2 minutes, starting with Singh, sir.
That is true. That economy is not for this year only. For years, not only India, majority of economies are facing this problem of ICU. And that is the basic difference. When we gone for financial crisis of 2008, economies were not weak globally, but that is the situation different. So certainly majority of economies are going on ventilator or will be going on ventilator. But one thing is very clear, that it will depend on the willpower of the state governments and the central government, how they handle the situation. The governments which handle the situation properly, those governments or those economies are going to survive in future. And this another case is, which I said just now, that implementation of each and every scheme is to be monitored very properly. And this is the lesson for India, that health sector is to be given priority. Local supply chain is to be strengthened. So that coronavirus has given us the opportunity, that two lessons basically, that strengthen at least the health sector. And second case is that we have to deal with the other issues, that local supply chain cannot be stopped, or we cannot be totally dependent on other countries. And second aspect, which I suggested initially, that in case of migration labor, I think the government should have gone for wage subsidy issues, that wages should have been subsidized and the local workers could have been stopped there only. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Chandrasekhar, your final remarks.
I think Indian universities, Indian academics, Indian social scientists need to start doing more informed research. Research cannot be driven by what data is available. I think we have to start working on building better data systems. And it could just be, you're doing a research study in this Rajasthan University. It just could be about one panchayat. Collect good data. Ask questions which can inform policy, which can guide the discussion. And it should not be that we actually ask only those questions which existing data can answer. So while the medical community is doing a great job of addressing this COVID crisis, I think we as social scientists need to hold a mirror to ourselves and say, can I do better research, ground up? And that's the message I want you to take home and hopefully reflect on what meaningful research can each one of us do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Manoranjan, sir, your concluding remarks.
Well, I think the consensus is clearly that growth is going to take a massive hit, whether we end with 0.5% or 1% or even negative -1% to 2% needs to be seen. But my submission is, if we take the corrective measures right now and the measures are taken in a coordinated and concerted manner by all the stakeholders with a sense of urgency, growth could gain traction again quickly next year. Even the IMF data set says that India could again rebound very quickly to about 7%. This seems to be the consensus. But then right now, all of us have to quickly provide the right kind of ecosystem. All that measures that which you have talked about, these and other measures need to be put in place. And proof of the pudding is in the eating. So as Professor V.V. Singh said, implementation has to be the key going forward. Provided all these things are done on the ground and the results are visible in transforming the ground realities, I'm sure quickly we will go back to the growth path in a year or so. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Bhanumurthy.
Yeah, I think thank you so much. Yes, it has been a wonderful discussion. Now, in terms of the fiscal policy, my closing remarks would be that, the fiscal policy should not be hesitant, should be quick, should be wise, should be accommodative, both for the short term as well as the medium term, and also should ensure the better coordination between the fiscal and monetary, and also between the center and states. Now here, we do have better coordination between the fiscal and monetary. I think between center and states, I think that's where some issues are there. There are a lot of discussion about how there is a weakening center and state relationship, particularly financial relationships. Now here, I would urge that there is a urgent need for an institutional setup where there would be better coordination between center and states. Now, in the absence of planning commission, now many people have proposed for a fiscal council. I think that needs to be brought in. I think one of the policy measures that needs to be front loaded is establishing the fiscal council that can ensure the center state financial relationships much better than what we have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all the panelists. So I think we have tried to answer very much pertinent questions, but I'm sure a lot of questions must be there in the minds of the participants, and I think it's not possible to take them up as of now. But I think we will now close the discussion, and I would like to thank Professor Vijayveer Singh, Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Professor S. Chandrasekhar, and Dr. Manoranjan Sharma for their valuable time and relevant opinion on this issue. I'm also thankful to Dr. G.L. Meena, Secretary, Rajasthan Economic Association, and Dr. Bura Chaudhary, Executive Member, Rajasthan Economic Association, for their support in the conduction of this webinar. I'm sure a lot has to be done, and the government and the other stakeholders should implement a differentiated strategy for tackling this crisis. I once again thank all the participants for joining the webinar, and we will come up with the next webinar soon. Good day, everyone. Thank you.